really excited again to see so many folks joining us. I want to just tell you a little bit. So this session is called Pulling from the Headlines. And it's an Aunties discussion circle, if you joined us last time, to talk about different issues related to Indigenous people, truth and reconciliation, and all the important issues that are coming up right now. I'm Nikki Zawadski. I'm from, my people are Polish and French. I'm a first-generation white settler, and I've been here at Aboriginal Health for 9 months now. My pronouns are she and her. And yeah, I'm a strategic lead at Aboriginal Health. So I just want to let you know that the session today is being recorded like it was last time. And so if you have colleagues or family members or friends that want to view the session, it will be linked on our ICS learning resource pages, and that'll be on YouTube too, on our YouTube channel. So I'm going to turn it over to Leslie Bonshor now to lead us through things. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you to everyone who's joined us. First off, acknowledging our place in which we're conducting our work today. I personally am sitting in my office in the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. But as you can see from this map, it outlines all of the First Nations that are within the Vancouver Coastal Health Region, or maybe I should turn that around. Vancouver Coastal Health Authority operates within their traditional territories of these First Nations on this map. Thanks, Nikki. So we want to welcome you, Aceville, good day. Welcome to our session. We'll start off with a brief introduction of the aunties that are around the circle, and just imagine that you were here around our kitchen table listening into our conversation and our thoughts. As Nikki mentioned, we are pulling from the headlines. So really trying to keep things relevant. And if you've watched the headlines, you know what we're talking about. So first off, since I have my feather and I am the one speaking, let me introduce myself in our way, always showing up as who we are, truly are. The top picture is my tribe, my Joe family from the Chiapton First Nation and also the Nooksack Indian tribe. Then as you go down to the left, as you look at this, this is my immediate family. The three ladies in the front row, starting from the right, are matriarchs of our family. And the third one in is my grandmother, the late Ethel Fisher. And that is me sitting on her lap, and I'm about 3 years old there. So that makes us about circa 1968. You know, I always introduce myself as my grandmother's granddaughter. So that's really important to me. And over to the right, that's a picture of my family. And it's actually a little old, but, you know, still relevant. Myself and my husband, Mike, my three kids, Carly, Clayton, and Riley, who's my stepson, Carly's spouse, Anthony, and then my two grandsons in front there, Carson and Benson. So, you know, my first introduction is always that I am a grandmother, and then a mother, and an auntie, and a sister, a friend, and a spouse. And I jokingly say in that order, and my husband absolutely knows where he sits in that order. And I am thrilled to also be, for my work, the lead of all things Indigenous health here in Vancouver Coastal Health, and surrounded by brilliant people like Brittany and Miranda. So thank you so much for allowing me to ground myself in my identity, who I am, and what I bring to this work. And over to you, Brittany.
Itaquail Teuk Messiah. Welcome, everyone. My name is Brittany Bingham. I am of mixed ancestry from the Sishak Nation on the Sunshine Coast. And I am the Director of Indigenous Research here at Vancouver Coastal Health, Indigenous Health. And that's a joint role between the Center for Gender and Sexual Health Equity. And I'm also currently an assistant professor of social medicine at UBC. And like Leslie introduced, I'm also a mother to two beautiful kids pictured here, Natalie and Sean. I'm a wife, a daughter, a sister, a niece, and a granddaughter. and just really honored and privileged to be part of this beautiful team led by Leslie. So thanks for joining us today. Miranda.
Aiswael, Tilyan Telsqui, Talitzlaqua Thawali. Hi everyone, my name is Miranda Kelly and my ancestral name is Tilyan, and I'm Stalo, member of Sawali First Nation with ties to Cowichan, Snuneymuxw, and Sumas First Nations on my dad's side and mixed settler ancestry on my mom's side. I'd like to situate myself today as a granddaughter. On the bottom left are all my grandparents, all in the spirit world now. I'm also a daughter and a wife and a mother. On the top, you can see a photo of all my family, my husband's side of the family, my side of the family, and some of our dear friends. That was celebrating my daughter's birthday, my youngest daughter, who's actually born on September 30th, Orange Shirt Day. And yeah, another thing that brings me to this work is my background as a birth worker. On the bottom right is a photo of me and some of my beautiful colleagues and sisters and friends in this work, other Indigenous women and birth workers, some mothers, some aunties, and I feel like they have collectively supported me and slightly pushed me into taking on the role as Director of Indigenous Women and Family Health here in Vancouver Coastal. So I think about myself in these roles here and accountable to these family members and community members as I serve in this role. Thanks, Nikki, back to you.
Thanks, Miranda. So just a reminder, like we did last time, if for those of you that joined us, a little bit of a content warning that some of the discussion today might be triggering or upsetting, and that it's normal to feel uncomfortable. That's part of how we learn, right? We're learning a lot of difficult truths right now. So I'm urging you to take care of yourself and draw on supports if you're struggling. And just a reminder that our Indigenous colleagues have a lot to deal with right now, especially, and our work as non-Indigenous folks is to educate ourselves and stand alongside them in solidarity. So I'm speaking to my non-Indigenous colleagues and community members now, and this is just a gentle reminder to let's do this work of learning more, drawing on one another for support and not bringing our Indigenous colleagues in to do a lot of emotional labor because they already do so much of that work. Yeah, it's our job to step up and to take action, right? This is our time to show our commitment. And at the end of the session, Jake and I are going to provide a list of supports and resources in one of the slides. And of course, everything will always be on our ICS Learning Resources page. Yeah, thanks. I'll turn it back to you, Leslie.
Thank you so much. And one other mention is that we will be using Slido at the end of this. So watch for that in the chat box as we introduce the Slido code. Just again, another way to collect some information and feedback from all of you. So our intentions and intention setting is extremely important to us. And you know, we practice it from an early age, and we're taught by our elders about intention setting. And our intention as an Indigenous health leadership team, as a circle of aunties, we'll talk more about that in a minute, is really to ensure that we have been bringing opportunities to Vancouver Coastal Health colleagues and friends and peers to have more dialogue about what Truth and Reconciliation calls to action are all about. So we're calling this the TRC Talks, pulling from the headlines. Again, just our commitment is to breathe life into these headlines, breathe life into the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, so that we don't lose sight of why we're here, why Indigenous cultural safety is important, why anti-Indigenous racism work is important, and why stories and headlines like we heard from the Indian Residential School findings from Kamloops are very important for all of us to learn and understand. So the Anticircle, so the next slide, the Anticircle is really our safe circle We're sitting around the kitchen table as we watched our grandmothers do and our great grandmothers and our aunties do. All of us are aware of this, and aunties are a real safe place. They're an opportunity where we're saying, come listen in, folks, come in and join us. Bring your curiosity, open your mind, open your heart to what we have to share. This isn't your standard webinar. We're not just speaking at you and giving you information and asking you to do something about it. We're asking you to really listen with great intent of our stories, our personal capital P experiences as Indigenous women, moms, granddaughters, as Brittany and Miranda both mentioned. Come into this space, try to let go of looking for answers, all of the answers in this session. This is an hour long of conversation, of having tea, of just really listening intently with your heart and your mind, so that you can learn from this open place. We encourage you to turn off your phone, turn off your work. If you're eating something, our teachings are, usually we're doing something with our hands while we're listening because it helps us to retain it, but also consuming something means you're actually taking our words and all of this feeling that we're putting into these words, you're also consuming that as you're listening and eating. So please eat your lunch and enjoy our conversation, and use the question and answer feature to pose any questions, and use the chat box just to share some thoughts as we go along. So welcome to Aunties Circle, our last week's Aunties Circle. We had 442 participants, blew our mind, couldn't believe how many people tuned in, and we received amazing compliments and feedback about how much people really enjoyed this learning environment through this conversation, through listening in to the aunties have a little tea party around the kitchen table. So we're going to kick things off, starting with Miranda. Miranda, would you like to tell us a little bit more about this slide?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. So we had such great positive feedback from last week, and I heard from a number of folks who really felt that the piece on companioning that I shared last week really resonated with them. So thank you for that feedback. And I thought that we could just revisit that for a moment, and I could expand on that a little bit, expand on the idea of how we sit with grief, and offer this idea that grief and gratitude can coexist. We talked a lot, last week about the collective grief that we're feeling right now, and that it can feel really heavy. And as leaders, that can make it really hard for us to do our work when we are sitting with that grief. And one thing that I do to keep myself grounded in this work is to practice gratitude, and to recognize that even though we are feeling that grief that's really heavy right now, we can also at the same time feel gratitude. So for me, I make space to sit with gratitude. I think about all of the things that I'm grateful for that our ancestors have given us. And, gratitude for what I have today, that, I have gratitude to sit in this circle with other aunties that I learn from, and I draw from their strength too. So that helps me, remind myself that we can do hard things. We talked last week about that purposeful pain, that yes, there's pain in this work as we sit with this grief, but we can do those hard things. And I draw strength from gratitude. Gratitude helps me stay in a heart-centered place. We talked about how this is heart-centered work. And yeah, gratitude helps kind of keep me grounded in that heart-centered approach to our work. So Leslie, I see you nodding. I'm going to invite you to comment on that.
I love it. I love it. I do believe that so much. And again, what taught by my grandmother, right? I just wake up every day saying, oh, thank you for another day. Even when it's cloudy and rainy sometimes, you still wake up, just sit with gratitude, always have gratitude. The grief part, the sadness, the hurt is where we grow. And we talked a lot about that before, Miranda, and Brittany. We're always talking about kind of being in this mild state of outrage all the time, right? As Indigenous people, or always in this state of grief as well for what we lost or what, we haven't gained back yet too, what was taken away. And so I celebrate gratitude around knowing that my grandsons that I pictured earlier in the photo have a different life ahead of them and a different future than I had, or that my father had, or my grandmother and grandfather had. So that always gives me lots of hope. And with hope, the hope comes from the gratitude. Thank you for reminding us about that. And the companioning, wow, what a great concept. And I'm using it every chance I get now, Miranda. Thank you for introducing that to us. And for those that didn't hear the companioning document, and it's the tenets of companioning. It is attached to our previous session. Please read it. It is just amazingly a great placeholder for where we can put our thoughts and energy. How about you, Brittany? What does this grief and gratitude mean for you?
Yeah, just echoing a bit what you said, Leslie, the recent events in the news and what's come up has really, for myself, but also I've seen as a theme for others, we're existing in between those two places. We're existing in between the grief and the gratitude because, we see what previous generations had to go through to get us here, but also see so much hope and beauty in the children now, and how strong and resilient they are to really change things going forward. So it's definitely a balance around the edge of both all the time.
Yeah. So maybe that's a good segue into, the existing headlines that we're starting to see just since last week, more around foster care. Right, lots of children in foster care. In fact, some of the statistics say that there's more children in foster care now than ever attended Indian residential school. So moving to the next slide, and again, you can read these headlines. We're asking you to read them. Don't turn away. I know sometimes it gets harder and harder as we keep seeing these tragic stories coming out. We're saying, please take it in. Let it be your fuel to work with us, to work with other colleagues, to address racism in healthcare, to address the needs of the Indian residential school survivors' families. So we really wanted to focus this one on children, moms and babies, addressing foster care. So Brittany, you've come up with one of my favorite quotes from Madeline Dion Stout. Tell us more. Tell us what you think about this.
Yeah, I've had the privilege to meet Madeline quite a few times, and just being in her presence is very powerful. But in some of her writing, she's really talked about the residential school legacy and child welfare as being a ripple effect, like a pebble dropped in a pond. She talks about the effects of trauma rippling outwards, not just, of course, felt strongly among the firsthand survivors, but rippling outwards to, family members, children, and communities. And how that continues to really be felt strongly today. And that's what I've seen, just as an example with the events of the past few weeks, that this has not just rippled outwards to every Indigenous person in the community, but to, other Indigenous communities across the world who have been, sharing that this is devastating for all Indigenous people, that there's a collective grief among communities about this colonial history. And it's just really being felt deeply, but Madeline just puts it in such beautiful words.
Yeah. I love all of the metaphors of water and drops of water and ripples. And I often talked about our work here in Vancouver Coastal Health as being like this drip and this little wave, and now we're in the tsunami. we knew it was going to happen, and the tsunami is, I'm so happy to say, all of our colleagues and peers and friends who have come to help with this work, who have seen their way and their contribution in this work of creating a culturally safe health system, but also inclusive, of us as Indigenous health leaders and subject matter experts, for lack of a better term, these aunties and these grandmothers and mothers who just know from that first learning of being a caretaker and being somebody who looks after others. I love what Madeline Dion Stout has written about this, and just seeing and asking actually our colleagues to look past what they see in front of them all the time and try to see behind that the history, the impacts of colonization, the impacts of Indian residential school, and the thoughts of, oh, that's something in the past, get over it sort of stuff is really not what helps us at this time. It's actually acknowledging how these kinds of historical impacts show up today, right, Miranda?
Yeah, as you were, speaking to the imagery of the water, I was just thinking that, about how sometimes it feels like, a small drop like this image, but sometimes it feels like a huge tsunami wave, like when the news hits us and it just feels like it's completely overwhelming. And you think about the impact of Indian residential schools, it really was a tsunami wave that touched every village, every family, every community, and generations, entire generations. So you can see how that ripple effect is a big ripple effect.
And if we go over to another great big piece of our work in the next slide, the current day thing that we're grappling with and asked to respond to as a health system is this call out of racism in plain sight.
Yeah, in plain sight really said, very clearly, pointed to the fact that the healthcare system has been complicit in this continued apprehension of Indigenous children. It came through residential schools, it's come through now the child welfare system, and the health system has been complicit in that. In plain sight, the Indigenous respondents were 7 times more likely than the non-Indigenous to report always feeling like they're treated as bad parents. And that narrative is rooted in those colonial policies of, oh, we're going to take children away, we're going to separate them from their families, through residential schools, through child welfare. And so, even though some of those practices like the Indian residential schools no longer exist, that narrative perpetuates that Indigenous people aren't well equipped to be parents. And so we see that influence in the child welfare system and the way that Indigenous parents interact with the healthcare system. This quote here that is circled comes from In Plain Sight, from a non-Indigenous parent who has an Indigenous partner. And he says, after the 3rd time, we gave up and I just started taking the kids to every appointment because I am a white male and got better service. Sad, but reality. Yeah. So we see how that has that lasting impact even today, how Indigenous parents are thinking about, how they interact with these systems like healthcare and child welfare, and the mental, emotional gymnastics we have to do to think, how do I protect myself and my family and my children in this situation?
Oh, for sure. I don't know how many times I've heard from Indigenous women talking about getting all dressed up to go to the doctor's office or to go to the emergency room because they were scared they would be turned away if they showed up in their, street clothes or whatever. And so that's a real concern, and it's part of our health system. So we have to do something. But I always say that the In Plain Sight report and the work of Dr. Mary Ellen Turple-Lafond and her amazing team, it's truth telling. Again, it's more truth. And with truth, we can find that reconciliation everyone's looking for. With truth, you cannot, you can't combat that anymore. There's no denying that there's racism in healthcare. This was the proof we were waiting for and we needed. It hurts sometimes to read this because we're part of this health system, and some of the testimonials that people shared are heartbreaking, but we have to use it as the fuel. I always say we use it as the fuel, the painful process of taking this kind of reality and turning it into something good. What are you thinking, Brittany and thoughts around some of these findings?
Yeah, for my dissertation research, I did a circle in community, and we were talking about solutions to housing and homelessness. And this issue for Indigenous moms came up in that conversation where, there was a story shared about a mom who, felt so under surveillance all the time by systems that, she didn't even feel comfortable letting her children play outside in the yard unattended, because of the fear of being judged in terms of neglect or not supervising the children enough, or and just really showing how those things become internalized, the colonization and these stereotypes become internalized by Indigenous moms at times. So it makes me think more about the structural inequality and systemic racism, and how we're often just really looking at those things as a personal deficit. We're attributing those structural things to be a deficit for Indigenous moms and Indigenous women, instead of looking at what they actually have power and control over in their individual families and in their situations.
Absolutely. And we're so tired of the deficit-based data collection that we've seen and the headlines we've read. And Miranda, we've always talked about how do we flip that around? And so if we go to the next slide, please, in the image, what does this say to you, Miranda?
I love this. We can just stay on this image all day.
Yeah.
It kind of, for me, it goes back to coexisting with these multiple realities. We see in plain sight that harm is still happening, and we need to confront that. But we also need to see the flip side, that healing is happening. And we so need to hold that up and uplift that and celebrate that. To see this mama holding her baby and her fist up in the air, it's just a perfect illustration of the narratives that we want. We want to flip those narratives, those things that we've internalized. We want to internalize this, that we are strong, we are good parents, we can reclaim and practice our culture in a way that has a ripple effect for future generations. So where we've had this intergenerational trauma and that ripple effect, we can reverse it. We can have that ripple effect of healing, that I'm doing that work to heal and stop those negative cycles and take action that's going to heal for the future generations. So we're in that space of learning to coexist and, take that devastating data that, we talk about and understand that trauma and take an informed, trauma-informed approach, while also creating space and holding space for the healing that is happening, because we know that there is so much great healing that is happening, and we see and we celebrate those folks who are doing well and doing great and changing the narrative.
Absolutely. Really speaks to that strength that we talked about, and we introduce ourselves as granddaughters and great grandchildren. And I look at this picture and think, well, what if that little baby was actually my great grandmother? Right? So that would be, to me, always what I come from. And you, Miranda, because we're both Stalo. And so for us to even be here, we know that there were strong, strong women before us. Right. And this is what we're taught, as at a young age, about life givers and responsibilities of matriarchs and women and aunties and in general, as the caregivers and as leaders of our communities, that to me, this kind of image is what we're aspiring to as a goal, is that all women, all Indigenous women with their babies are standing strong in their identity, using their culture, representing their culture in their clothing even. And she just looks absolutely stunningly beautiful. It's a gorgeous photo. And we do have to give credit for this photo. We'll add it before we publish this slide further. But yeah, it really resonates with us. And I can see her singing the Women's Warrior song. What do you think, Brittany?
Yeah, I like what you said, Miranda, about the rippling effect. It's not just the trauma that ripples outwards, but the strength as well. And so, this picture just really says to me, it's often said, the ancestral trauma can be felt in our DNA, but so can the strength and the resilience. And we are from women who have survived so much to bring us here today. So that's there too. And we just need to uplift Indigenous moms to have them all looking like this beautiful mom here.
Absolutely, yeah. And I will credit the photographer is Alicia Monroe Sutherland. Alicia Monroe Photography on Facebook has beautiful series that she's done celebrating Indigenous motherhood by sharing photos of Indigenous moms breastfeeding their babies. And it's absolutely beautiful work, beautiful. And I think, art forms like this help us shape and change the narratives.
Absolutely. I was talking to Brittany and Miranda about this image earlier and just saying, it actually reminds me of Brittany. It reminds me of my daughter. It reminds me of Miranda, that all of you young women coming up and you're stepping into these spaces and owning your role and contributing to a better day. But also you're bringing beautiful children into the world that are just give us so much hope. And another worldview, right? Like children are always an inspiration to us. We're always looking to them as our leaders because through their eyes, we're supposed to see and learn from. And I just love that. I mean, more babies, please. We also know that Indigenous women are still, they're having babies 2 to 1 to non-Indigenous people. And the fact that the impact on the population in general is going to be quite staggering 50 years from now, what that might look like. So the more help we can provide now for healthy babies and healthy moms, and again, just bringing it back to that idea of it addressing foster care is, what if the goal was to keep moms and babies together? What if instead of birth alerts, we were alerted to this mom might need help to keep this baby with her, right? This is really what we want to ask. And I know last session we had a social worker ask a question to us saying, as social workers got a bad rap, right? Like people think we're only about taking children. I don't think that's true. I think there's probably some historical story, right? So another part of our work is myth busting. That might have been the old 1970s way of being a social worker, but now we can be a different kind. Now we can work together. There's all sorts of care teams that wrap themselves around their clients and their patients. So I hope with the work that you're doing, Miranda, with all the other leaders in the health system for moms and babies, and really starting to promote this. What are we going to do and what are we doing to help moms really keep their children with them? How do we get them the best start ever? And maybe that's leading us into this reconciliation process, Brittany. This concept of reconciliation that gets talked about all the time.
Yeah, so this image is really just to represent that reconciliation as a process is not a linear one. And, it's more like a tidal process where it'll have some ebbs and flows and we'll move through different stages of it. And as mentioned earlier, we're sort of still in this truth telling phase right now and working our way through that. And just to have that as an expectation that it's not just a destination that you'll arrive to in one action or with one pathway. So it's just something to remind us that it is a constant journey and we will continue going through those ebbs and flows and ups and downs of this process.
Miranda, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, just thinking about, the kind of the healing journey that many of us are on and how it really does feel that way, that it ebbs and flows. And some days are easier than others. Some days it feels like it really takes everything you've got to keep going. But that's the nature of the work, and that's the nature of being human, I guess.
Yeah. I think, you know, when it comes to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the work of the Honorable Murray Sinclair, and, you know, he's been quoted quite a bit the last few weeks since the Kamloops Indian Residential School story came out. And I don't want to misquote him, but, you know, Google him and just listen to all of his beautiful videos and the things he says about, you know, why would we ask all these people to tell their truth if we weren't going to learn from it, right? So that's the part of reconciliation I keep thinking of when we look at the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. I think there's 94 of them all together, and we can't do them all because they're not all about related to healthcare alone. There's several that talk about, you know, the truth telling. It's about believing, right? Another part of Kamloops Indian Residential School and the horrific headlines and the story was not only shocking, but the non-Indigenous people that were hearing it and learning it for the first time were like, we've actually talked about this before, that this was real. And I'll never forget, we were having a conversation with Priscilla from our team. And Priscilla said to us, well, what it tells me is that they didn't believe us the first time, right? So to be shocked by it means actually the truth we told you before wasn't real until this evidence came forward. So, you know, this is where we struggle again with the truth telling, the reconciling, the history to now. And it's just like where the part that we were talked about before too, Brittany, about the researching, all these RE words, they always mean more work. They always mean we've got to dig deep, we've got to look at things, whether we're reconciling or researching or renegotiating our terms in which we're going to work, and rethinking. Maybe that's one of the best ones. Let's rethink what we're doing and how we do it so that we're doing it from that place of reconciling the past with the future and getting to that hopeful state. And again, I think your next slide, Brittany, and the imagery of the next slide is just bang on.
Yeah, you reminded me too of this amazing quote, Leslie, from Cindy Black's talk about reconciliation. And, you know, she really just calls everyone to witness, right? As we read these articles, as we see these frameworks for truth and reconciliation, we are all witnesses to this. And once we've learned the truth and witnessed the truth telling, you know, we have a duty to carry forward some action on that. And one of the things she says all the time is, if you want to make reconciliation real, it begins with not saying sorry twice. So we know what's happened, and we know things need to change. And this is part of this beautiful image by this wonderful artist, Indigenous artist, Wakia Jane. It just really speaks to our focus on women, Indigenous women, and rematriating and returning to that model of matriarch leadership, which was disrupted as part of colonization in our communities, that the women were strong leaders and holders of the knowledge and traditions, and of course, birthing our Indigenous babies and raising the future generations. So this is really, you know, one of our focus areas to support matriarch leadership, but also to support Indigenous women, which in turn supports community wellness as well. And Leslie, I know you have lots to add to this one too.
I know, so I think I'll let Miranda go first, because I think I do. It's just, I just love the image particularly.
Yeah, I love it so much. And, you know, the imagery of the words as well, just kind of, well, of course it draws me to birth, because that's my brain. I'm always in birth, but
in case case you didn't know, she was a doula before she came here.
Yeah, I mean, but it makes me think about all the different ways that matriarchy shows up in our communities, in our villages, and in the ways that leadership happens. And so sometimes we have very, visible matriarchs that are out on the front lines defending the land, or matriarchs like Leslie who lead in a health authority. But there's also a lot of work happening by our matriarchs that you don't necessarily see in the headlines, that it happens in a very quiet, unassuming way. So I think about my matriarchs like the midwives who are catching babies, sitting beside someone as they learn to breastfeed and coaching them through that, that is also rematriating. And sometimes it happens in quiet spaces behind closed doors, but it's perhaps just as equally powerful, if not maybe even more powerful, to think about how we nurse our next generation to take on these roles as matriarchs.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And, another reason why we call this our Aunties Circle and our Aunties discussion is because, as women, we have a role of, caregiving and watching out, and, the fact that it takes a village. The village is usually the aunties. They know about, or, back in the day before we were all in our houses behind closed doors, keeping in our own backyards, we would just be a very communal village. And, everybody would gather in the longhouse. Everybody would eat together. They'd live together, right? I remember my grandmother's house, the back door, there's no such thing as a lock, right? The back door was always open, and you could come in if you wanted to just have a cup of tea and a visit, or if you were hungry, or whatever you needed. There were always the houses you knew which ones you could go to and get whatever you needed. And it was a responsibility that was just part of who we were and who we are. I feel that still that's my role in my family. And I think both of you also have that role in your family, where you're looking after your nieces and nephews and your cousins and siblings whenever needed. And it just becomes this part of this role. And so, Miranda, and thank you for acknowledging, I'm not a matriarch by terminology in Stolo world. My mother's Italian, so I can't be a matriarch. But I use matriarchal leadership to inform my leadership as a health leader, as a manager, a supervisor, a director, VP, whatever you want to call me. Those are all just words. That's just language that the system uses. I still see myself as, mom. I'm the work mom, and I'm the work auntie. And I use that to guide and lead this team, but also, I think we can model these behaviors for others to learn from, that we show up first and foremost as caring mothers, grandmothers, aunties, and as women and men in the leading, from that very human perspective of what it means to be parental, what it means to be siblings, and relations, right? Like we say, all my relations for that reason. We want to include everybody into our circle. Nobody should be left out. There's another thing that you've always said, Brittany, and I know we don't have it on a slide this time, but that she's planting. Is she not? Is she just pulling energy up from these women, or she actually have the women below planted something that she's taking?
Yeah, I think it is that great saying of, planting the seeds for the trees so the next generation gets the shade. That saying, really just guides all of the work that we do. I think that's it in a nutshell.
That's it in a nutshell. Everything is with great intention. It's not ours. I says this isn't for us to hold alone. This is we're actually just good care providers, we all play different roles, right? Most of my work right now is working with taking care of the system, disrupting the system just enough so that it can be better for our people. Miranda, disrupting, women's care, babies' care, making sure that we're all looking at things from that women's lens, because we firmly believe we take care of women, women take care of everyone else. That's just the rules. Brittany, using her ability to researching so that we can give the evidence in this very evidence-based health system, enough of the evidence to prove that they need to make a difference and they need to do things differently. It's very important to create this learning health system that we're trying to get to. I see you've popped back in, Nikki. It must mean that we're moving on to some questions and answers, and before we finish off with a few thoughts from Miranda. So what kind of questions have you got for the aunties today?
We've got some great ones in here. So I have a question from Nicole, and they're talking about something that they saw in our VCH internal news, our e-news, and it's the article about moving forward to respond to in plain sight. And they ask, from recommendation number 8 of in plain sight, they ask health authorities to adopt an accreditation standard for achieving Indigenous cultural safety through cultural humility and in eliminating Indigenous specific racism that's been developed in collaboration and cooperation with Indigenous peoples. So they're asking, can you share where this is at in VCH or who we could ask in terms of recommendation number 8?
Yeah, I can, because I've been involved with the work for the last 3 years. So a group of us, all health authority representatives, community, First Nations health directors, First Nations Health Authority, we've been working together with the HSO Health Standards Organization to develop these accreditation standards for measuring Indigenous cultural safety in these health systems. And yes, it did take 3 years. It was no easy task. And honestly, it was really an interesting process where we were trying to put measures. How do you measure cultural safety in an organization? So we looked at everything from structural and governance to bricks and mortar and programming. So it covers an awful lot. And that HSO standard is just actually out for public review right now. So it'll stay out for public review for a couple of months, I believe, and then we'll get the feedback from the general population and community, and then we'll go back and tweak or do what we need to do. But it's close. I hope it'll be ready maybe by next year to actually implement in the province of BC only. This was a BC driven process.
Great. So it sounds like that work is happening and we're on it. It's amazing. Thanks, Leslie. We've got some folks that are really interested in how they can act, which is amazing, right? Someone's asking, C. Andrews is asking, what do you wish people would say or do in everyday interactions right now with Indigenous people that could be received as genuinely inclusive and supportive? So question for the aunties.
Auntie Miranda, did you want to answer this one?
Yeah, I was just gonna dig for. So I pack paper around with me everywhere that I go. I've got the TRC, the In Plain Sight, the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirit calls for justice. So actually, I did want to refer to the calls for justice from the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit relatives. There is a whole section called Calls for Justice for All Canadians. And there's some really great specific actions that everybody can take in that section. And I think it comes with just day-to-day, how we walk through this world. And when you notice something happening that you can disrupt, disrupt. So if if you hear or see violence, denounce and speak out violence against violence, learning this history that we've been talking about. And then when someone says like, well, I don't know about that, or I don't even know if that's true, educate them, share what you know. So I would say, yes, please go look at all of these reports, because a lot of work has gone into creating, thought around what actions can you take. There's lists of actions that we can take.
It also reminded me of your companioning, the tenets of companioning, right? The bereaved, the people going through all of this, which is the Indigenous population who we're asking everybody to actually reconcile with. We're not here to do the reconciliation. We're here to help and lead it and give some examples, but companioning. And we will share the tenets of this again, but it is about listening in the heart. It's not about analyzing with the head. So, I appreciate the question. And I guess our answer is always, do what comes natural. Like, we're not asking you to retrofit all of this into who you are. We need you to actually go internal, heart and mind connected into what it means for you. Place yourself as whether you're a father or a son or a brother or an auntie or a sister, place your humanness first and what you would want for your family, what you would want if this had happened to your community, and then go from there. But first and foremost, we're looking for real passion and personal commitment based on who you are and what you have to offer. And I know everyone who works in this health authority is a care provider, is a caring person. Dig through that.
Do you have anything you'd like to add as well, Brittany?
Yeah, this is one that I think about a lot. I mean, I think that people really say that they want to know what to do next. Leslie and Miranda have provided such great insight into that. And I think, looking at these solutions that exist, looking at these calls to action and thinking about your own capacities, your own unique gifts that you have to bring to the table when it comes to implementing these solutions. And that's, in a work role, but there's also in a personal role as a Canadian that I think about as well. And I just thought about a story that someone told me about their child, their non-Indigenous child, learning about this history and learning about residential schools in the school setting, and that this child reflected on their little Indigenous friends, other Indigenous children, and thought, and that the little girl said, I thought about my friends and I would never want or let this happen to them. Aww. And I don't want to underestimate the power of teaching the next generation how to never let this happen again. Doing the truth telling, working with children to learn everything and to be, little social justice warriors in themselves as they grow older, because really that's the hopeful future that we have, is for the next generations to learn this. So that is being part of the solution, supporting that education, supporting that awareness and steps moving forward, shouldn't be underestimated also as a contribution to this work.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's another question in the chat that's asked specifically about what are some books for kids to learn about Indigenous history. I bet you Miranda has some at the top of her mind right now. We can definitely post some too on our ICS Learning Resources page after. I'll post the link for ICS Learning Resources again, but what say you, Miranda? You probably
I literally just saw one of my books on the floor this morning. I guess someone actually picked it up. Yeah, I have so many books. I'll provide a list that we can post.
Oh, such a good auntie. House full of books. Actually, good mom. There's a couple little girls in your house that probably love their books.
Yeah, we have a book, I think it's called Stand Like a Cedar, which is such a beautiful book. And one of their
That's
favorites.
Nicola Campbell's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got it here. I'll pop it in the chat right now for everyone.
Yeah, but there's thankfully lots of books that did not exist when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Many.
We forgot to mention too with the matriarchs and Miranda's work, how she's got this matriarch advisory council to her work. I'm so jealous, right? We do have elders in residence as part of our team, but that's a real intentional process of making sure that we have matriarchs advising the work that Miranda is doing. So valuable. I really want to hold my hands up to you for doing that.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I just posted the link for Nicola Campbell's publisher site for Stand Like a Cedar. And I'm also drawing your attention to our ICS Learning Resources page where this will be recorded. And I just want to let you know the session from last week, we're just finalizing the edits on it, and it will be up probably by the end of the week. So this session and the previous session will be on there, and there's already so much amazing stuff. Yeah, so I'm going to move us ahead to the next slide. And this is yours, Miranda. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so as we're winding down and getting ready for the Slido coming up, I just wanted to offer some words, not my words. These are, this is an excerpt from Layla F. Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy. I read this book last year, and it was actually really helpful for me in my own learning. It's about anti-Black racism, but I think it's very relevant to the work that we do addressing racism in the healthcare system. And she also has a podcast, if anyone's interested, called Good Ancestor Podcast. And she poses the question, you know, what work are we doing to be good ancestors to those around us and future generations? So I love her work, and what she writes is, I invite you not to run away from the pain, but to allow it to break your heart open. Superficial attempts to heal racism like color blindness, tokenism, and white saviorism protect you from having to feel this pain. Doing the inner work and going into the truth blasts away all the lies and games, giving you a real opportunity to create change. There's no safety in this work. There's no clean, comfortable, or convenient way to dismantle a violent system of oppression. You must roll up your sleeves and get down into the ugly, fertile dirt. I love this as a visual, all of us out there gardening, digging together.
Yeah. I love it too. I love it. And I remember you saying you did a talk a couple weeks ago, right, about your role at one of the, I think it might have been a pest. Oh no, you did it with C.G. She and Brittany was the convener of that, and you basically said we need our non-Indigenous friends to do the hard work right now while we're out doing the gardening and taking care of ourselves. Yeah. And I thought, beautifully said, Miranda. I don't want to have to do all this heavy lifting alone. I'm happy to do it because it's what I use for fuel. I know that I'm always, as we always jokingly say, just mildly outraged, just enough to make sure that we come to work to do this hard work because we know we're making a difference. I can honestly say I've been at it since 2005, working in Indigenous health, trying to change health and wellness. And I couldn't be happier with the progress that we are making and the fact that everybody has it on their agenda and have an interest in helping us with this work. It just goes to show when people like yourselves come and join us in these kinds of conversations, we want to keep having the conversations. We're going to keep having the conversations. We're going to keep ripping things out of the headlines and talking about them. So join us again next Wednesday. And Nikki, you have a Slido question for everybody?
So I'm inviting everyone to go to slido.com and enter the code 112622. And I'm just going to share the Slido right up here. Hang on a moment. I had it ready, I swear. Here it is.
That's okay. We can fill it every time.
It's already full. This is amazing. People
we
are
love
really
hearing from people. It
people
gives us
are really
inspiration.
on it. Yeah, look at all this. So there's a lot already. So people are rematriating, collective responsibility, gratitude and grief, critical disruption. Oh, I love that one. Future generations is such a huge one. I'm so glad that people are recognizing, it's our time as non-Indigenous folks to step up and share the load of the work that's been going on. Indigenous people can't continue to do this work on their own anymore. It's shameful that they've had to do it for so long. And so, wow, look at this heart-centered work, social responsibility. Amazing. Wow, everybody.
Matriarchs, love it. And I guess we'll end with that. It's 1 o'clock. It's 1:01 actually. So again, in Miranda's words, roll up your sleeves, get down into the ugly, fertile dirt. So when you're out there doing your gardening or when you're figuring out just what you need to do, it's always good your hands are moving while you're thinking. Yeah. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Nikki, for helping us facilitate it. And
thank you,
Miranda and Brittany, amazing aunties and amazing health leaders. Thank you so much for doing what you do and doing it with us.
Thanks, everybody. The resources will be available on the ICS Learning Resources page. And if you need support, you can reach out. There's information on that page. Thank you.